Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Well, good morning. Today, the papers are full of the news that lockdowns will end eventually, and Tory backbenchers, of course, are pushing for it to be sooner rather than later. We're going to talk to Rodney Hobson today, who's going to look at which shares might do well as life starts to get closer to returning to normal.
Look for companies that are restoring the dividends because they are coming back, and those companies are going to do well. And there's one reason, for example, to look at the banking sector, which hasn't done as badly as we've thought.
We'll talk to Rodney fairly soon. Plus, more on Brexit woes, last Friday's GDP numbers, Trump's acquittal, and other stuff. You'll just have to stay with us. I mean, you'll find out soon enough. It's Monday, the 15th of February, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
Tell you, the best headline in the newspapers this morning is the Daily Star. Their headline, "You couldn't make this up. Publicity-shy woman tells 7.67 billion people, I'm pregnant." A shy woman, famous for hating publicity, told the entire world last night, I'm having another nipper. In the scenes that could have been straight from a rom-com but weren't, the ex-actress and her ginger beau chose Valentine's Day to announce it. And they've liked the publicity shot, which goes with this, the two of them sort of lying on a lawn, her head resting in his lap. They've related it to the scene from Notting Hill, which, of course, was also about an actress who is trying to avoid publicity. This is, of course, the news yesterday that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are expecting another baby in May. Isn't that nice? But that's made your day. We don't need to say anything else on the matter. Rodney Hobson is going to give us a share market update soon. I tell you, we've got a great lineup of guests this week. We've got Paul Kavanagh, Liz Barkley, and the FT's chief economist Martin Wolf amongst them as well. So a incredible lineup of people joining me on It's the Business this week. We should touch on the GDP numbers from Friday. Of course, they came out just after our podcast had been published, rather annoyingly. But, you know, the upshot of it is, so far, no double-dip recession for the UK, although, let's face it, the first recession was bad enough, and the climb back is going to be slow. GDP numbers on Friday showed a slight rise for the last 3 months of the year, 1% rise. So year on year, Q4 was 7.8% down on a year ago. The expectation was it was going to be 8.1% down. So a little bit better than was expected, somewhat better than Q3. But Q1 this year is not going to look too flash, is it, with a full-on lockdown? The FT on the weekend was saying that this is the worst shock to Britain's economic output since the Great Frost of 1709. It feels like we've just had the Great Frost of 2021, but it's gone today. When you get out of bed this morning, it's as mild as anything. Thank goodness for that. It's all gone. But we are getting back to our GDP numbers, even though it looks like they're bad. We're doing better than many other countries if you compare like for like, says Rishi Sunak on ITV News on Friday.
Now, we calculate GDP in a different way to pretty much everybody else. And if you either correct for that difference or look at it in a way that's more comparable, nominal GDP, what you find, as the Bank of England and the Office for National Statistics have pointed out, what you find is that our performance then is very much in line or comparable to other countries. And in fact, you know, maybe on the margin better than places like Canada, Germany, Italy and Spain.
Very hard to believe that, isn't it? Interesting how he's spinning the figures, because on the face of it, our fall in GDP looks like it's twice what they've seen in Germany. And nominal GDP versus real GDP, really? I mean, nominal GDP means it's just not been adjusted for inflation. Is that going to make any difference when we are comparing like for like at a particular point in time? No, the difference is actually how they're including public services. So we measure consumption of public services. Others measure the money spent on public services. So we're talking about schools and health services and the like. And the BBC Fact Check website says the ONS, this is where it all comes from, the ONS looked at a measure of GDP excluding public services, which it said made little difference to the UK. Which was factoring in a decline in public services already, but made Germany's figures worse by 2 percentage points. So that is just spin, isn't it? No doubt about it. We've out of all the developed economies, we've been the worst hit. Why would he bother hiding that? Because we know that is the truth. And on Friday, he gave the warning sign that he's going to tax out any chance of recovery, saying he needed. I mean, I've heard people saying he's doing a good job, and he sort of is okay. He's been thrown in at the deep end, but the idea that we are going to tax soon seems like a foolish mistake. And yet here he is on Friday saying he needs to be open and honest with the public about the need for sustainable public finances in the future. That means taxes just around the corner, doesn't it? Well, look, the news that GDP wasn't as bad as expected certainly helped the pound on Friday. But the pound, I mean, let's be honest about this. The pound has been steadily rising since a low rate in September. It's gone from $1.27 to close to $1.39. Although, let's remember, since the Brexit vote, it has been markedly lower than it was. In fact, before the vote, it had been consistently higher than where we are now. For years, in fact. In fact, since 1986, the pound has been higher up to 2016 than where we are now. So let's not get too excited about a rising pound, particularly when we've got all this good news. Rishi tells us we're doing better than France and Germany. We're rolling out the vaccine at an astonishing rate. The wonder of the world. It's all good news, but still the pound hasn't recovered from where it was before the Brexit vote. But, you know, it's all going to click back into place after the vaccine rollout. Boris announced over the weekend that the first 4 groups are done, and it's onwards and upwards.
We've still got a long way to go, and there will undoubtedly be bumps in the road. But after all we've achieved, I know we can go forward with great confidence.
Yeah. He could have been talking about his pothole, his plan to remove all the potholes. It's going to be a rocky road ahead, because that's where he was before we were hit with this COVID-19, wasn't it? It was all potholes in the road. That was his big promise. But he's talking about the vaccine program there, which has overtaken the potholes in terms of the importance we place on things. The front page of the Express, Hancock. Let's get 32 million jabs target. We've now hit the 15 million target a day early, the Express reports. Wow! And we're going to more than double that in the next 10 weeks. 15,062,189 reasons to be cheerful, says the Metro. The Guardian, though, saying that the PM is being cautious. Number 10 resists Tory demands for end of lockdown by May. This is because Steve Baker, the Tory backbench MP, is against stringent lockdowns. Not surprisingly, he's trying to speed up the return to school and the reopening of pubs. He's got 60 or so Tory MPs backing him, the famous backbenchers. School back by the 8th of March, they want. Hospitality venues open by Easter. No legislative restrictions at all after the 1st of May. He says, let's reclaim our lives once and for all. And he's got a Union Jack emoji added in his tweet for good measure. No surprise then that there's he's pounced on a clip from Sophie Ridge on Sky News yesterday.
If it was up to me, I would say there are some regions where it could be open up earlier. Particularly in rural areas where they have very low rates of disease, and particularly if you focused on the low-risk group, which is the youngest children who really pose very little risk to themselves or other people. So, but I think, to be honest, if we had a definite date of the 8th of March and we stuck to it, I think most parents around the country would be happy, because that would give them time to prepare as well, because what people don't like is having sudden switches in policy overnight.
Yeah, we don't really need time to prepare, because we've got to make sure the school uniforms fit. I mean, the kids have been stuck at home, haven't they? Getting fatter during lockdown, and they've been out of school for a few months. That was Tim Spector from King's College London. He basically says, 50,000 people have been tracked after the vaccination, and it shows 67% protection against the virus after 3 weeks. So no reason why schools shouldn't get back sooner. It is going to be the issue about, getting all the uniforms, getting sorted. We do need a couple of weeks to sort all that out. And then, of course, we've got to get used to the idea that we've got to get the kids out of bed again to get them off to school in enough time. School runs coming back. Could we just take a bit longer with it? Could we slow down the vaccine? Maybe just keep the kids at home till after the school holidays. I'm joking, of course, because a lot of people are really struggling with having the kids at home. Some of us, it's quite easy because we've got a separate room for them. We close the door, they go to school. Now, look, it's Ready, Steady, Shop, front page of the Daily Mail. This is all over the newspapers today, the race back to it all. Johnson eyes Easter escape is the Times front page. The road to freedom, front page in the Mirror. As I say, all the newspapers. Meet grandchildren outdoors in March. That is in the Telegraph. They also cover the hotel quarantine. I'm surprised newspapers aren't making more of this today, because the hotel quarantine starts today. although it seems we are somewhat unprepared for it. Heathrow predicts queues of up to 5 hours, the Telegraph is reporting, in quarantine chaos. This is, of course, for people returning from 33 red list countries. They have to be shipped off to a hotel somewhere. This is British nationals only. If you come from those red list countries and you're not a British national returning home, then you just can't come here. But otherwise, you've got to go to a hotel. Heathrow is saying the E-gates have got to be closed because they've got to enable those checks to make sure that everybody is safe. And yeah, then and the question is that apparently the website where you go and book has been crashing. So there's going to be a lot of people coming today, arriving this morning, who haven't booked their quarantine hotel, coming from those countries, and they've got to sort it all out. They're going to, in 5 hours, seems like a very short queue. It could be an absolute disaster. Maybe 10 days. If you could stand in the quarantine queue for 10 days, by the time you get to border control, your quarantine period is over. Problem solved, perhaps. Now, look, I don't think I will ever understand American politics. Mitch McConnell, Republican leader in the Senate, over the weekend, talking about Donald Trump and his involvement in the rioters of the Capitol building on January the 6th. Here he is.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president.
He then went on to acquit Donald Trump of the charges. So Donald Trump may have been impeached, but it really does make no difference. He can stand in office again, and I'm sure he's going to keep his supporters on side until the next election. Is he going to stand as a Republican at the next election? The Republican Party would be fearful, I think, of what would happen if he didn't. So they are now stuck with him. So will America lurch even further to the right next time when he has only one term left and nothing to lose? We've seen how far he could push things. And look, by the way, on Trump, I love this. So I'm just finishing that point quickly, I should say. You have to wonder in that case, whether the Republicans are going to give Joe Biden a rocky time, because they are going to be supporting the Trump vote. So the extreme side of politics, the extreme right, is going to survive for some while longer. Talking about the extreme right, I love this. This was a tweet. I tweeted yesterday about who we've got coming up on the podcast this week because it's a stellar lineup of guests. One guy, John Carlisle, I wonder whether he was joking. He replied, "I thought Fox had fired you." I'm not sure whether he was joking or whether he was genuinely confused, but he said he'd mistaken me when we questioned him on it. He said he'd mistaken me for Lou Dobbs, who was sacked, of course, because of this huge lawsuit against the Murdoch empire by the voting technology company Smartmatic. To give you an idea of who Lou Dobbs, I mean, this is how far we are apart. This is Lou Dobbs before he was canned.
We have a president who is a true leader, in my opinion, one I happen to believe will be regarded as one of this country's greatest presidents, indeed our greatest.
Yeah, he's talking about Trump, by the way, not the guy who's there now. Yeah, I'm not that guy. Just in case you're confused. I understand the confusion because we've both got the letters D-O-B in our names. I always get Harriet Harman and Woody Harrelson confused for exactly the same reason. But look, the new guy in the White House is pushing ahead with his stimulus package. Maybe next week it could get voted on and become law next month. Maybe as much as $1.9 trillion being pumped into the US economy. That is new money, hence all the inflation fears. This argument that if you put too much money into the economy, then that's going to create inflation. And we have this strange situation now where bond yields are rising because of this inflation expectation in the United States, along with equities. People are buying up shares as well. Normally they move against each other. People jump out of shares and into bonds, or out of bonds and into equities, but not now. And Janet Yellen was urging other G7 countries to do the same over the weekend at an online G7 meeting over the weekend. She said the US is now back at the table, ready to engage with the rest of the world, rebuilding alliances and refocusing on climate change. How quickly the pendulum swings. She also made the point that people have got to get serious about ensuring that the vaccine gets everywhere in the world, not just in the developed nations, because otherwise it's just going to come back and bite us, isn't it, from those countries that haven't been vaccinated. Now, Brexit continues to bubble along in the background. Andrew Marr on the BBC yesterday asked Dominic Raab about the head of JD Sports, who, because they import from overseas, would face tariffs on goods that they then distribute across Europe, because this zero tariff agreement is only for things we make or substantially make here. If you're a retailer that imports, repackages and sends out again, then you're going to have to pay duties into the EU. So JD Sports might have to move their warehouses and all their operations onto the continent to avoid those tariffs. This was Rob's answer to that.
And we've been clear all along that come the end of the transition period, there would be changes, and we put a significant amount of money into supporting those businesses. I think it's also fair to say, for the sake of balance and context, there have also been lots of other businesses investing in the UK.
And does he mean by that buying up UK companies, foreign companies owning UK companies? Because that counts as foreign direct investment. And is that really a good measure, or is that just a consequence of the weaker pound that we've been talking about since 2016? But as to always saying that they said there would be changes, they've always said that, he said. Remember when Boris Johnson said this?
And there'll be no non-tariff barriers to trade.
Yeah, they've been clear on that all along. David Davis famously said that there would be no downside to Brexit. Quite the opposite, he said. Here he is in the early days of those Brexit negotiations.
It means getting the best deal for Britain, one that's unique to Britain, and not an off-the-shelf solution. This must mean controls on the numbers of people who come to Britain from Europe.
Yeah.
But also a positive outcome for those who wish to trade in goods and services.
Yeah, the positive outcome seems to be coming for those who move their businesses to Europe, doesn't it? But on Northern Ireland, and I know I'm sounding like a Rumona who's lost and won't get over it, but you have to look at where we are right now, particularly on the border question. That is going to be resolved now by a hotline. The FT is reporting today, a top-level emergency hotline, because the border issues require day-to-day care, which does sound like the whole situation has been moved to an intensive care ward, doesn't it? We're having to watch the patient, and the doctors aren't quite sure of the cure. Although I think, what they are hoping is that somewhere along the line, there won't be a border anywhere in Ireland or between Northern Ireland and the main line, and dodgy imported stuff in the UK, which doesn't meet EU standards, could still be shipped to people in Ireland but not over to the continent. So in effect, Ireland adheres to British standards and to European standards, both at the same time, whichever is the weaker of the two. Sort of like, uniting the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. What could possibly go wrong with that, I wonder?
It's the business, making sense of it all.
With Phil Dobbie.
Well, there's no doubt the fall in the case numbers of the coronavirus is helping the FTSE 100. So which sectors will do well in coming months? And in the US, of course, it seems the NASDAQ in particular has continued unabated, irrespective of COVID. In fact, perhaps because tech companies have been doing well as we spend more time working from home, of course. The NASDAQ finished Friday over 14,000 points, finishing on yet another new high. To give it some perspective, its high before the pandemic was 9,730. So during the crisis, its shares have risen 45% in a year. The FTSE, meanwhile, well, it was about 7,400 before the crisis. It's 6,590 now. So it's actually dropped 10%, which is coincidentally how much the GDP of the UK dropped last year. Rodney Hobson is our share trading expert on It's the Business. He's written almost as many books as Catherine Cookson, I think. Well, maybe not quite that many, but he's given a good go, including Shares Made Simple, Small Companies, Big Profits, How to Build a Share Portfolio. There's more as well now. Welcome back, Rodney. I know you said when we last spoke that it's not a straight comparison to look at the UK and US markets, in particular because we rely more on dividends here rather than the company's growth or the share price growth. But I'm still wondering, and you have to wonder, don't you, when you look at that difference that I gave, whether US stocks are overvalued and UK stocks perhaps are undervalued, particularly as we're winning on the vaccine race and, life might return to normal sooner here. Is that a point? I mean, could shares be undervalued here?
Oh, I think they are. I think that, yes, part of the problem is that shares here have taken into account the rather chaotic nature of the lockdowns has been, and the fact that the government has always seemed to be running behind the pandemic rather than controlling it. But the stock market doesn't reflect the fact that we've got the best rollout of the vaccine of any major nation. I think we're about third overall, but Bahrain is one of the ones Israel's ahead of us. But otherwise, of the major nations, we're way out in front, and that's not reflected in the stock market. And I think that the FTSE is undervalued. I made the fall from top to bottom about 11.5% on the FTSE. Now that contrasts the Dow is up about 7%. Of course, the Dow doesn't have so many tech stocks, but it's at a record high. The S&P, so that just shows actually it's not just tech stocks that are up in the US. The Dow is up 7%. The S&P 500, which some people think is a much better measure, is up 16%, also to a record high. And somewhere in the middle we've got Europe. For example, Germany, the DAX index is up 2% from the top just over a year ago. The CAC 40 in France is down 6%. So it's a very mixed picture across the globe. I think it is opening up possibilities of where you should invest next. And the great opportunity is here in the UK.
Yeah, because even if you forgot about the United States, if you compare it with the DAX and say, well, they're up and we're down, and yet, they really are having problems with the vaccine in Europe, whereas we're streets ahead, obviously. But also there's that question then, which I really want to talk about today, as to how various sectors are going to do. Because obviously IT sectors are, have been doing well around the world, particularly in the United States. There's not quite so many here, but we've got like internet services, companies that deliver stuff over the internet, which have been doing pretty well over the last year, whereas IT services for corporates have been down. And we've got a very mixed retail picture as well. So some supermarket chains are doing okay. But, Morrison's and Tesco haven't been so good, and a disaster over the last year for Marks and Spencer's. But Sainsbury's doing well. So, I mean, even if you look at some of those sectors, some of those sectors are going to do better than others. And within those sectors, surely there's going to be a bit of catch up from some of those companies that have not been doing well as well.
That's certainly true, and I'm glad you mentioned Sainsbury's. Let me declare my interest. I do own shares in them, but you were one that put in the plug, not me. It is a very difficult picture to assess, and I think that a lot of companies are not all quite they seem. You see, supermarkets, for example, sales have shot up because we can't go out to restaurants, so we've got to buy food to eat at home. We can't go to the pub, so we've got to buy booze to drink at home. So the revenue has gone up. But revenue isn't the only thing. Of course, we're all much more interested in profits. It's better to have a low revenue and a big profit than have a big revenue and a small profit. And supermarkets have been hit by much higher distribution costs. And so that extra sales have not translated into higher profits. Even Sainsbury's hasn't done quite as well as we might have thought. And we've seen similar things, Ocado, or is it Ocado? I never know how to pronounce it. The distribution company, which is linked to M&S Food, the one bit of M&S that's doing well. Ocado has not been able to translate higher sales into higher profits. Royal Mail, which has been delivering far more parcels. Amazon aren't the only ones, but Royal Mail isn't geared up delivering parcels. It's geared up delivering letters, which are down 16%. So it's had its best Christmas ever as Royal Mail, but it hasn't translated yet into higher profits. So it's a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
so when you're trying to assess that, then do you look at, to what extent do you look at sort of like the technicals, things like the earnings per share or the price to earning ratio, whatever you want to use, and how much of it is company news, announcements that you would look out for, and how much of it is a more macro approach, looking at expectations of how the economy is going to evolve. Which at a time like this, which is most important to you?
I think that the actual company announcements are what is most important. You have to always bear in mind with company announcements that the company will always try to put the best spin it can on the results. So it's always slightly rose-tinted. But on the whole, the company announcements, you can't hide the actual figures. And if you read through the figures, you can see how the company is doing. And to my mind, it is the company announcements that the companies have to make twice a year. Most companies do a trading update where you do have to slightly read between the lines. But in the end, the company cannot hide forever how well it is doing. I think that if you read the company announcements and try to use a bit of common sense on it. This is your first and most important source of information. You can look at the news agenda, yes, look at what newspapers are saying. They have a better more time than you have to pick the results apart. And so I always look at what the newspapers say. And I don't entirely rule out looking at how the share charts are moving, because sometimes over the short term, share prices may move in quite the wrong direction. Reality will catch up in time, but if that happens, if you're following the company announcements, you can see when a company that's been battered will turn the corner and it's time to buy the shares.
So in the retail sector, as you say, cost has been the big problem, and a lot of that will be the delivery cost, won't it? Because they don't want to charge the full cost of delivery, and even if you're doing click and collect, which is what I do, you're still going to have someone standing out there in the car park managing all of that, which obviously is more costly than me going around and doing it all myself. So it's understandable where those costs are going to be. Those costs, could potentially disappear. They might see revenue fall a little bit, but I suspect not that much. Certainly over the next few months. So I mean, they're the things I guess to look at, aren't they? What's going to change in the trading profits for these companies?
Yes, what we don't know for sure is how things will settle down once the pandemic is past. There may be an enormous amount of pent-up demand. TUI, the holiday company, thinks there's an enormous demand for holidays. It seems to think that people are going to book holidays this summer. I think that's more optimistic than I am. But they're saying that people are booking longer holidays, or they're booking a 5-star hotel instead of a 4-star, so they're trading up. There is an awful lot of demand because there are people who've just not been spending, who've still been earning but not been spending. On the other hand, there are people who've seen their jobs disappeared or been on furlough and seen their income fall, so these people may be running up debts. So we're not quite sure how it will all unwind. Will we, for example, go back much more to buying in shops than we will online? I think it'll be a bit in between. I think we will go back to spending more time in shops, but not to the extent we did before. I think that everything has changed. It's the same thing, always the same with the stock market. Everything's the same, except it's completely different. We will know people who've got the habit of buying online will continue to do so. So the companies that have in the retail sector who have switched to selling online and done it well, and one of them that springs to mind, and I do hold shares in this, is Dunelm. They're into homewares, which has been a complete disaster for Marks and Spencer. They're not essential shops, so they've been closed. You think Dunelm will have done very badly, but Dunelm has switched very rapidly into selling online. It's handled it extremely well. Its sales are going up, its profits are going up, and now it's restoring the dividend. And this, I think, is another great factor in choosing shares at the moment. Look for companies that are restoring the dividends because they are coming back, and those companies are going to do well. And is one reason, for example, to look at the banking sector, which hasn't done as badly as we've thought. We haven't seen bad debts come through, but the banks have made provisions for bad debts, which may or may not happen, and they're going to start paying dividends again this year. So there are sectors, it's all changed, but things will be
it's how we come out the other side, isn't it? What you're saying, who's managed to hold share and grown as a result of all of this. What about volatility though? So you mentioned TUI with their expectations that they're all going to go on summer holidays. I'm with you. I don't think that's going to happen. So they may talk up their share price only to see it come down again. So do you look at do you just ignore volatility and say I don't want to play in that game, or do you say, okay, well if the price is going to go up and then come down again, I'm going to get in early and then I'm going to sell out before it comes down? I mean, it seems to me that if you do that, if you go after, what are called these high beta stocks, which have got their high degree of volatility, you can spend, you'd have to be on it every hour of the day, wouldn't you? I mean, you're basically day trading in shares and you have to know exactly what's going on every minute.
Oh, if you have to know what's going on every minute, forget it. I don't look at the screen every minute. I don't think that's fun. But volatility, I'm a big fan of volatility because it opens up buying and selling opportunities. I think shares that bounce around all the time, yes, it's scary. But all companies now have greater volatility in their share price. I think computer trading, for example, has certainly had a big effect. We've seen short sellers who drive down share prices, and then the companies, if the company is reasonably solid, will bounce back. Volatility is your friend. Look for shares that are bombed out and think, is this unfair? They're going to bounce back. Or if you see that a share, I don't look at charts all that much, but I see if a share keeps bouncing back from a certain level, if it comes back to that level, there may be a good reason to buy in there and hope that you will see profits. Welcome volatility and learn to live with it. Yes, it's scary when your shares go down, but it's wonderful when they go up. Volatility helps, and we're going to see much more of it.
Yeah. All right. Look, I could talk to you for ages. We haven't got time, unfortunately. But another sector, then, in your mind, we've talked about banking. We've talked about retail. I mean, just logically, what else do you think could do well as we all, as life gets at least halfway back to normal this year?
I think that construction could do well because one of the things that we can do. Well, firstly, house building is doing well. We still have a pent-up demand for housing. We still have more people than there are houses to live in. So that sector is always going to do well. But we've got all this controversy over HS2, which is going to go ahead. To my mind, it is a dramatic waste of money, but it's going to provide work for all those companies that work on this kind of business, widening roads, building railways, extending broadband. These are the things that are going to happen. Now, to some extent, this may already be reflected in share prices, so one should look at it carefully. But infrastructure is going to be needed, and this is part of the new world. And where, in contrast, for example, building offices and commercial property and retail outlets, that's going to do badly as we shift away from it. So I
think that's a point, isn't it? That is one change. I don't think many people, or as many people, will be going into London 5 days a week. There's going to be more hot desking. There's going to be less office space required in central London, and but then that raises the opportunity. What happens? Who takes advantage of that? Does that become the retail sector converting offices into retail space? There's always an opportunity, isn't there?
Oh, there is. Yes. Every setback presents an opportunity. As the old saying goes, as one door closes, another opens. You've got to look for the door that's opening, and it's always there.
Good point to leave it on. There we are. That's Rodney Hobson, our share guru on It's the Business. Before we go, look, there was a new radio station launched today. I know radio stations are launching all the time, but I think this one could do quite well, actually.
It's the first time I've ever launched anything. Not a boat, not a dinghy, but to launch Boom Radio is one of the highlights of my career. No question about that.
That's Graham Dean yesterday at the launch of Boom Radio. Awful name, Boom Radio, but it does sound quite good. I mean, it's boom because they're talking to the boomers, but I'm not sure boomers really want to be called boomers, do they? But anyway, they launched on DAB. Most people, actually more people now listening to digital than they're listening to FM, so that's not a problem. But to try and reach people, and this is a neat bit of promotion, which is really the reason I'm mentioning it. They have been giving within the M25, they have given a digital radio to every vaccination centre. So older folks getting their vaccinations, they've got a digital radio so they can listen in. So they're basically grabbing a captive audience. There we are. If they were smart, they would have given them the radios that only played Boom Radio. Maybe, because otherwise they might get the digital radios and listen to radio too. Now, look, also, quickly before we go, I know it was a very long programme today. There was a tweet yesterday from the European Central Bank, because, of course, it was Valentine's Day. Please, whoever's in charge of the social media accounts at the ECB, don't do this stuff. They tweeted, "Roses are red, violets are blue. We'll keep financing conditions favourable till the crisis is through." I think somebody had too much champagne for breakfast, whoever's in charge of their Twitter account. There are concerns in Europe that now those financing conditions are going to be inflationary, of course. You've got Jens Weidmann, the president of the Bundesbank, said that the expansionary monetary policy will see inflation in Germany surge to more than 3%, and that could mean a fundamental redirection of monetary policy. Could they start putting interest rates up in Europe? Seems a long way off, but everyone is talking inflation now. Roses are red, violets are blue, inflation is coming. We're in a bit of a stew. How about that? See you tomorrow.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthebusiness or wherever good